My in-laws ate every piece of food I brought to a family barbecue, even though they knew I couldn't eat most of what they were serving. When I ordered myself a takeaway instead, they called me selfish for not buying food for everyone else too. I'm in my 30s, and I have several food restrictions that my partner's family has known about for nearly 10 years. I don't eat beef or pork, fish has always made me feel sick, and too much dairy or oily food causes painful stomach problems. I'm not trying to be difficult, and I never expect anyone to redesign an entire meal around me. I usually bring food I know I can safely eat. About a week ago, my partner's family invited us to a barbecue at my in-laws' house. We packed 3 full bags of food, including chicken pieces, wings, asparagus, potatoes, corn, and other items for everyone to share. There was more than enough for me, my partner, and anyone else who wanted some. Everyone knew some of it was specifically there because I couldn't eat the beef and pork being served. My father-in-law was in charge of the grill because he'd recently bought an expensive new one and refused to let anyone else near it. While he cooked, I was at the other end of their large garden playing football with some of the younger relatives and keeping the dogs entertained. I had no reason to think I needed to guard my own dinner. When the food was ready, I walked over to make myself a plate. Every piece of chicken was gone. The wings were gone, and almost all the vegetables we brought had disappeared too. The only food left on the table was beef, pork, oily side dishes, and a few snacks that weren't enough to count as dinner. I asked my father-in-law what had happened to the food we brought. He casually told me the rest of the family had eaten it first. I reminded him that we had brought those items because they were the only proper food I could eat, and that everyone already knew about my restrictions. He and my mother-in-law immediately dismissed me and said I was just being a picky eater. That comment annoyed me more than the missing food. These weren't new preferences I'd suddenly invented. They'd known for years that certain foods made me ill, and there were still enough leftovers to fill their refrigerator. This wasn't a situation where hungry people had eaten everything because there wasn't enough. They had simply helped themselves to all of mine first. I couldn't leave because my partner had driven, and we were staying overnight since their house was a couple of hours away. I also didn't want to spend the evening eating crisps and pretending I wasn't hungry. So I opened my phone and ordered a takeaway from a nearby restaurant I'd used before and knew wouldn't upset my stomach. When the food arrived, my in-laws suddenly became offended. They asked why I hadn't checked whether anyone else wanted to order something. I pointed toward the table covered in their food and the refrigerator already filling with leftovers. Everyone else had already eaten, while I was the only person who'd been left without a proper meal. They still called me selfish and said ordering food only for myself had upset some of the kids. The so-called kids ranged from 14 years old to well into their 30s. Apparently they were disappointed because my takeaway looked better than the food they'd already eaten, including the meal they had taken from me. My mother-in-law started making comments about me being a spoiled princess, and my father-in-law agreed that I had made the barbecue uncomfortable. I asked how ordering one meal for myself was more disrespectful than knowingly serving me nothing I could eat. Neither of them gave me a real answer. My partner was caught in the middle and kept saying both sides could have handled things differently. I understand that family arguments are uncomfortable, but I still don't know what I was supposed to do. I brought plenty of food, told everyone which items I needed, and only ordered something else after they ate every safe option available to me. Now my in-laws are still making sarcastic comments whenever food comes up, as though I ruined the entire gathering. From my perspective, I solved a problem they created without demanding anyone cook again or drive me somewhere else. I didn't stop anyone from eating, and I didn't ask them to pay. I simply made sure I had dinner too. What would you have done if you were in my position? I trusted my friend with my backpack for one night. She went through my stuff, plugged a random USB drive into her gaming PC, destroyed it instantly, and then demanded I buy her a new computer. Somehow, I'm the one she's calling irresponsible. I'm 20, and I always carry something called a USB killer in my backpack. If you don't know what that is, it looks just like a normal flash drive, except it's designed to destroy electronics by sending a high voltage pulse through a USB port. Mine has a tiny devil face sticker on it so I never mix it up with my regular USB drive. I know that sounds strange, but there's a reason I keep it with me. I still live with my parents, and they're incredibly nosy. If I leave anything unusual on my desk, they'll pick it up, ask questions, or even plug it into their laptop just to figure out what it is. Keeping it in my backpack has always been the safest place. Yesterday I had to leave campus unexpectedly. I asked one of my friends to watch my backpack for a while, and later I realized I wasn't going to make it back before she left. I texted her and asked if she could just take the bag home with her so I could pick it up the next day. She agreed, and I thought that was the end of it. Instead, she admitted that once she got home, she started going through my backpack. She opened different pockets, looked through my things, and eventually found the USB drive with the devil sticker. Rather than wondering why it had a warning sticker or asking me about it, she assumed it was my regular flash drive. She told me she got curious and wanted to see what files I had saved on it. Without thinking twice, she plugged it into her gaming PC. The moment she did, the computer shut off completely. It wouldn't power back on, and after checking it out, she realized the motherboard and power supply had both been destroyed. She called me immediately, asking what kind of USB drive I had. When I explained it was a USB killer, she completely changed her attitude. Instead of apologizing for searching through my belongings, she started blaming me. She said I was reckless for carrying something that dangerous and claimed I should replace her entire gaming setup. I honestly couldn't believe what I was hearing. I reminded her that I never gave her the USB drive. I gave her my backpack because I trusted her to hold onto it. I never gave her permission to search through my things, and I definitely never told her to plug an unknown USB device into her own computer. I do feel bad that her PC is ruined. Gaming computers are expensive, and I wouldn't wish that on anyone. But every time I start feeling guilty, I remember that none of this would have happened if she had respected my privacy. She made the decision to snoop, and then she made another decision to plug a random USB device into her computer. What surprised me most was how confident she was that I should pay for everything. She kept saying that because the device belonged to me, the damage was automatically my responsibility. I asked her why she thought it was a good idea to plug a random flash drive into an expensive computer in the first place, and she didn't really have an answer. Some of our mutual friends think carrying a USB killer around is weird, and I understand that. Others think the bigger issue is that she went through my backpack without permission. They also pointed out that everyone is constantly warned not to plug unknown USB devices into their computers because it's one of the easiest ways to damage a system or infect it with malware. Now she's still expecting me to buy her a new PC, and I've refused. I trusted her with one simple favor, and she broke that trust out of curiosity. I never imagined it would end with a destroyed computer and an argument over who should pay for it. What would you have done if you were in my position? My manager looked me in the eye and said, "We don't pay you to think. Just follow the scanner." I did exactly that, and by the end of the shift, 3 managers were scrambling to fix the disaster they created. A few years ago, I worked at a car manufacturer whose name rhymes with Wanda. My job was to move parts from the warehouse to different sections of the assembly line using a motorized cart puller. Each trip involved picking up a train of carts loaded with parts, delivering them to the line, then bringing the empty carts back so they could be refilled. There were around 20 of us doing the same job, each assigned to a different route. Most of the routes were manageable, but one of them, which everyone called Route X, was a nightmare. It was the furthest route in the building, and it shared a narrow passage with 2 other routes. That passage was only wide enough for 1 train of carts at a time, so if another driver was already there, everyone else had to wait. Those delays added up fast. Every driver carried a scanner that told us exactly which carts to collect next and where to deliver them. On paper, it sounded efficient. In reality, Route X constantly fell behind because the scanner didn't account for the bottleneck. If you followed it without thinking, you spent half your shift sitting in line waiting for the path to clear while the assembly line slowly burned through its reserve parts. The people doing the job every day eventually found a simple solution. Whenever possible, we'd combine the smaller trains into one larger trip. It reduced the number of times we had to pass through the bottleneck, saved several minutes every cycle, and kept the assembly line fully supplied. Nobody was cutting corners or ignoring safety. We were simply working smarter than the software. That system worked perfectly until management noticed what we were doing. Instead of asking why we had changed the process, they assumed we were ignoring procedures for no reason. We all got called into a meeting and were told there would be no more improvising. The scanner knew the correct sequence, and our job was to follow it exactly. The manager ended the meeting with a sentence that stuck with me. He said, "The scanner tells you what to do. We don't pay you to think. Just follow the scanner." I didn't argue because there wasn't any point. If that was the new rule, then that's exactly what I was going to do. As luck would have it, my next assignment was Route X. The most difficult route in the building suddenly became the perfect opportunity to follow management's instructions to the letter. I stopped combining trains. I stopped planning ahead. I followed every instruction on the scanner exactly as it appeared, even when I knew it would waste time. The delays started almost immediately. Every trip through the bottleneck took longer than it needed to because I was making extra runs instead of fewer efficient ones. I could see the reserve stock beside the assembly line getting smaller with every hour, but I wasn't worried. I was doing exactly what management had told me to do. Eventually, the reserve inventory dropped to fewer than 5 parts. Considering the line used roughly 1 part every minute, everyone suddenly realized how close production was to stopping altogether. Managers who had been criticizing our methods earlier were now running around trying to figure out why Route X had fallen so far behind. Before long, 3 different managers were helping move carts just to prevent the assembly line from running out of parts completely. Watching them struggle with the same bottleneck we'd been warning them about for weeks was strangely satisfying. Nothing had changed except one thing. This time, everyone was following the scanner exactly as instructed. At the end of the shift, one of the managers asked me what had gone wrong. I looked at him and gave the only honest answer I had. "I don't know, boss. I was just following my scanner." There wasn't much he could say because I'd done exactly what he'd ordered us to do. Over the next couple of months, The company finally investigated the layout instead of blaming the drivers. They redesigned the routes, reduced the traffic through the bottleneck, and Route X stopped being the impossible assignment everyone tried to avoid. Ironically, the fix came only after management experienced the problem for themselves. The funny part is that none of us wanted to prove anyone wrong. We just wanted to keep the assembly line running smoothly. Sometimes the people doing the job every day understand the work better than the system does, and sometimes the fastest way for management to learn that lesson is to watch their own instructions fail. What would you have done if you were in my position? My coworkers spent weeks complaining that I was the only person leaving work at 4 p.m. They finally convinced my manager to make us all work the exact same hours, and they didn't realize they'd just made their own jobs much worse. A few years ago, I worked in a large office with several different departments. Each department could decide whether to use flexible working hours. The only rule was that everyone had to be in the office between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. as long as someone covered the phones from 9 to 10 in the morning and from 4 to 5 in the afternoon. Management didn't care how people arranged the rest of their day. I lived further away than anyone else on the team, so I asked if I could work from 8 a.m. until 4 p.m. every day. My manager approved it, and it worked perfectly. I avoided the worst traffic, phones were covered every morning, and nobody complained. I kept that schedule for almost 4 years without a single issue. Everything changed when I transferred to a different department. Even though the office stayed open until 6 p.m. and there was almost always someone working after 5, my new coworkers became obsessed with the fact that I left at 4. They complained constantly to our manager. He suggested rotating early finish so everyone could leave early sometimes. Nobody wanted that. He suggested several other compromises, and every single one was rejected. Their argument was surprisingly simple. If they stayed until 5, then I should stay until 5 as well. It didn't matter that I started an hour earlier. It didn't matter that I covered the phones every morning, while most of them were still driving to work. They only cared that they watched me leave before they did. Eventually, my manager called me into his office. He looked exhausted. He explained that he tried every reasonable solution, but the team simply refused to let it go. I asked if I could move to another department instead, but before I finished the sentence, he shared something that completely changed my thinking. After hearing it, I smiled and told him I'd stay exactly where I was. I asked him for one favor. I wanted him to keep delaying the discussion for another couple of weeks because I had an idea. He agreed. During that time, my coworkers kept complaining, convinced they were finally going to force me onto the same schedule as everyone else. When the department meeting finally happened, I mostly stayed quiet while everyone repeated the same complaints. Every now and then I made a small comment that encouraged them to keep talking. Once they had completely convinced themselves they were right, I finally spoke up. I said they had made a fair point and maybe I should just work 9 to 5 like everyone else. The room immediately filled with smiles and nodding heads. Everyone agreed that was the perfect solution. I looked at my manager and suggested something even better. Instead of only changing my hours, why didn't the entire department work exactly the same schedule? If equality was the goal, then we should all start at 9 and leave at 5 together. The room suddenly went quiet. My manager smiled and said it was an excellent idea. Starting the very next day, our department would no longer use flexible hours. Everyone would work 9 to 5 because that was exactly what the team had been asking for. There was one problem they hadn't thought about. At the time, a huge international sporting tournament was taking place overseas. Because of the time difference, many matches started during the morning in the UK. My coworkers had been arriving after 9 so they could finish watching the games at home before coming into work. That privilege disappeared overnight. I also reminded everyone that I had been skipping most of my lunch breaks to help cover the phones while they watched important matches. Since we were now all working identical hours, there was no reason for me to keep doing that. I would be taking my full lunch break every day from now on, just like everyone else. There was another surprise waiting for them. Every morning between 8 and 9, while the office was quiet, I handled several important payment approvals that made the rest of the team's day easier. Once my schedule changed, those tasks would still need to be done. They just wouldn't be done by me anymore. The funniest part was the information my manager had shared with me weeks earlier. The company had already decided to relocate our office to a new building much closer to my home. Once the move happened, working 9 to 5 actually suited me better because I could walk to work instead of fighting traffic. My coworkers spent weeks trying to make my life harder, and in the end they gave themselves more work while accidentally making mine easier. What would you have done if you were in my position? My mom agreed to let an old neighbor stay at our house for 2 nights. They showed up with almost no warning, treated our home like a free hotel, and somehow managed to get more entitled with every single hour they stayed. Years ago, we had a neighbor named Carol who watched everything happening in our backyard. Every Sunday she'd casually mention seeing us in the hot tub, watching my siblings play, or noticing when we had guests over. My mom hated having someone monitor our lives, so she even planted a row of privacy trees. Before they fully grew, we moved across the country and happily left Carol behind. 8 years later, Carol's husband suddenly called saying they wanted to stay at our house during a road trip. My mom agreed and simply asked them to send the dates. Then nothing happened. 9 months passed without another word, so we assumed they'd made other plans. Instead, Carol called less than 2 days before arriving to announce they were already on the way with their 4 children. Our family rushed to clean the house, prepare beds, and even repair a broken toilet before they arrived. They finally walked in carrying piles of luggage and immediately started looking around the house like they were checking into a vacation rental. When my mom mentioned that more notice would have been appreciated, they laughed it off and changed the subject. The first problem happened almost immediately. My cat hates strangers, so I warned everyone not to touch her because she was frightened and might bite. The youngest child ignored me, reached anyway, and got bitten. Instead of learning from it, Carol reached toward my cat and acted surprised when the cat tried biting again. I rescued my cat and carried her upstairs before anyone else could bother her. Dinner wasn't much better. While my family finished cooking, none of our guests offered to help. As soon as the food was ready, the older kids rushed to the front of the line and loaded their plates before anyone else had a chance. After eating, the entire family disappeared into the living room, leaving every dirty plate and serving dish behind for us to clean. The next night my sister and I were sharing a bowl of popcorn when their youngest daughter walked over and grabbed a handful without asking. Seconds later her dad did the same thing. Then Carol took the entire bowl right out of my hands and passed it around to the rest of her family. I was so stunned that I simply walked upstairs because I genuinely didn't know how to respond. Thursday morning was supposed to be checkout day. Instead of packing, they casually informed my mom they had decided to stay another night. Then Carol added that she'd need our washing machine for laundry and asked if we'd be making dinner because they planned to eat at the house again. They never asked if that was okay. They simply announced their new plans. By then my mom was completely fed up. My siblings and I kept encouraging her to tell them they needed a hotel, but she hated confrontation and worried Carol would spread stories about her back home. So instead we all quietly counted the hours until they finally left. Looking back, it wasn't one huge event that made them terrible guests. It was the constant assumption that our home, our food, and our time belonged to them. Every interaction made them seem just a little more entitled than the last until the entire visit felt exhausting. The moment they finally drove away, the whole house relaxed. We celebrated with ice cream and promised ourselves we'd never make the same mistake again. My mom learned that saying yes to someone out of politeness isn't always kindness. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is simply say no. What would you have done if you were in my position? My parents have one talent they've perfected for decades. They're late to absolutely everything. So when I got married, I secretly printed them a fake wedding invitation with the ceremony starting an hour earlier. It worked perfectly until one family dinner exposed my little trick. I'm 33, and my parents have always been late. It doesn't matter whether it's a birthday, graduation, holiday dinner, or family gathering. If the invitation says 6 o'clock, everyone expects them closer to 7. My mom is a wonderful person, but she has absolutely no sense of time. My dad spent years trying to get her out the door earlier before eventually accepting it was a battle he'd never win. My sisters and I grew up disappointed more times than we could count. We missed important moments because mom always thought she had time for one more phone call or one more task before leaving. We'd remind her, she'd wave us off, and we'd arrive after the important part was already over. It became such a normal pattern that nobody believed they could ever be on time. When my fiancée and I started planning our wedding, she gave me one warning. If my parents showed up late to the ceremony, I was going to regret it. She'd already watched them arrive halfway through another family celebration, so she knew exactly what they were capable of. Since my mom had a role during the ceremony, I couldn't risk taking that chance. While ordering our invitations, I quietly asked the printer to make one extra copy. It looked exactly like every other invitation except for one detail. My parents' version listed the ceremony starting 1 hour earlier than it actually would. I never told my fiancé because if anyone was going to take the blame, it was going to be me. On the wedding day, my dad later told me my mom was convinced they were running late. She rushed everyone out of the house and stressed the entire drive. When they reached the venue and saw guests still arriving, she assumed the ceremony had simply been delayed. She had no idea she'd actually arrived 45 minutes after the fake time on her invitation. The wedding couldn't have gone better. My parents were there before the ceremony, my mom completed her part, the photos were perfect, and everyone had an amazing time. I figured my little secret would stay buried forever because there was no reason for anyone to ever mention it again. Almost a year later, our family got together for a barbecue. We deliberately waited to start cooking because everyone knew my parents would probably be late. When they finally arrived, my mom noticed nobody was eating yet. Someone joked that we were simply waiting for them, like always. She immediately defended herself and insisted she wasn't always late. Then she proudly pointed to my wedding as proof she'd arrived on time for one of the biggest days of my life. The second she said it, one of my cousins burst out laughing. Everyone else tried to hide their smiles, but the damage was already done. My mom demanded to know what everyone found so funny. I could have lied, but I didn't. I admitted I'd printed a special invitation with an earlier start time because I didn't trust her to arrive on time. The entire table went quiet while she realized what I'd done. She was furious. She said I'd embarrassed her and made her look foolish in front of the whole family. I told her I never wanted to embarrass her. I just wanted my parents at my wedding before the ceremony started. Considering she'd actually arrived 45 minutes after the fake time, I honestly believed my plan had been necessary. Looking back, I still understand why she was hurt. Nobody likes finding out they've been tricked. At the same time, every other important event in my life suggested exactly the same thing would have happened without that fake invitation. My plan wasn't about humiliating my parents. It was about making sure they didn't miss one of the biggest moments of my life. What would you have done if you were in my position?